Black and other minority entrepreneurs often face extra hurdles to secure loans and investors in the United States. The coronavirus pandemic has underscored those problems for Black business owners. Some fear that the road to recovery will be extra long because of systemic racial inequities. As part of our COVID Chronicle, CBS News is looking at life during the pandemic in some of the biggest battleground states in 2020. And so we're now joined by our CBS News 2020 campaign reporter, LaCrai Mitchell, who has recently written about Black business owners in North Carolina and in Florida. LaCrai, welcome.
Thank you.
You spoke with Black business owners in North Carolina who said that they are recovering after they had to close or significantly modify their operations for months. Tell us more about how they've been impacted economically by COVID-19.
Absolutely. And, you know, it was interesting because I heard similar stories from Black-owned business owners in North Carolina and Florida. And I think a stat that gives a really good big picture context is, according to research that was done by the University of California in Santa Cruz, there were more than 1 million Black-owned businesses in the United States at the beginning of February. By mid-April, 440,000 Black business owners had to permanently shut. So we're talking a 41% drop, and for women-owned businesses, that was a 25% plunge. So I think the economic hit was clearly, you know, in some cases fatal for businesses. I think of Patrick Williams, who was one of the restaurant owners that I spoke with in North Carolina, and he's one of 4 business partners for Pier 34 Seafood and Pub in Goldsboro. And he told me that when the restaurant had to close because of the stay-home order in North Carolina, he had to start dipping into personal savings, him and his other business partners, just to make sure that they could keep their employees paid. Because for their employees, this was their full-time job. And while the restaurant has now reopened, he's still having to dip into those savings in order to stay afloat. And he said that at the current rate, if they continued making what they're making right now, in about 6 months, him and his partners are going to have a serious conversation about whether or not they can stay open.
Those statistics on closures are really, they make you catch your breath. I'm wondering, LaCrai, about the Paycheck Protection Program and loans like the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. They have obviously aimed to provide economic relief to businesses that are experiencing these difficulties during the pandemic. Were the business owners that you spoke to able to apply for these loans? Have they benefited from them?
Almost every business owner that I spoke to had applied for the Small Business Administration loans, and a few of them had received PPP loans and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan as well. But I'll tell you, Lana, for someone like Dr. Fitzherbert Harry, who owns Harry Physical Therapy and Wellness in Maitland, Florida, outside of Orlando, he received $3,500 from a PPP loan. But he said that was not nearly enough to cover his normal day-to-day expenses. And so luckily his wife still worked. And so that was able to help cushion the blow a little bit. But he says it's still been a financial strain because for someone like him who has older patients, when this pandemic hit, you know, he had patients who were afraid and they said, we don't want to have any more physical therapy services. So he went from a load of 25 patients to 3 within that time. And so you can only imagine, you know, what that does to the bottom line. I'll tell you, though, a Brookings Institution report using some data from the census showed that only 50% of small businesses that applied for PPP loans had received their loan by May 2nd. And that was a month after PPP launched. So you're talking within that month span, if some of these small businesses didn't have contingency funds, that's a long time. And I'll just give you one more stat because I thought this one really put things into perspective too. The Color of Change and Unidos US survey, they published one in May that found that 51% of Black and Latinx small business owners who sought assistance during the pandemic requested less than $20,000 from the federal government, but only 12% of those surveyed said they had received the amount they had requested when their survey was done. So even some of the businesses that were applying for these loans, when they were getting them, it might not have been enough. And in some cases, they still were just waiting to hear back and hadn't received them.
And we know for communities of color and in particular Black business owners, it's not just been the pandemic, but there has been a emotional, a psychological toll following the killing of George Floyd. How have these recent protests also impacted the people that you spoke with, LaCrai?
I thought it was really important for this story to get at what the impact of both protests and the pandemic, where that left some of these small minority-owned businesses. And I hate to be so stat heavy, but I think this sort of research is remarkable. The Center for American Progress suggested in April that businesses in Black majority neighborhoods were already losing billions of dollars in revenue per year compared with similar businesses in non-Black majority neighborhoods, even before the pandemic. And so time and time again, when I would ask these businesses whether or not they thought that systemic racial injustices had made this pandemic worse for them, the answer was yes. You know, I spoke with Shalisha Morgan. She had such a powerful story. She is the owner of Geek and Heels, which is an electronic repair shop in North Carolina. And when the mall closed, her kiosk closed, and she was devastated. And she told me that as a Black woman in tech, she's not the tech that wealthy investors are typically looking to invest in. And that was really sad to hear in some ways, because she was saying that it was already really hard for her even before this pandemic to access capital. It was hard for her to get loans. And so when something like this hit, she was very afraid that she wasn't going to be able to continue because it had already been hard for her to sort of solidify and to secure funding. Luckily, she was able to get a loan before this, and throughout this, she has received an advance. But also you had Dr. Harry, again, in Florida, who said that the Black-owned businesses were experiencing a double whammy, is what he called it, during this time, between the pandemic and the country's reckoning with racial injustices. Because he said even for him, before this pandemic, sometimes it would be difficult to network with doctors because they might judge him before they got to really know him when they would see him. And so one of the things that was interesting, and I'll wrap here on this thought, is that for Glenn and Jalinda Jones, they own Insure Financial Group in Florida. They said that they feel that this moment has been sort of an awakening within the community. And what you've seen is that some of their clients are more aware now and do want to support more Black and minority-owned businesses. And they said this sort of awakening has left them feeling more valued, because now people are seeing the value in keeping dollars within their community, because those dollars then work for them. And so for a Black-owned insurance agency like theirs in Lakeland, Florida, it's making them feel more valued. And this moment has really been an awakening, is what they called it.
Well, we have been chronicling how Asian-owned businesses have been deeply affected by the coronavirus pandemic and racism, and it's very interesting to hear your statistics. I love your statistics, LaCrai, on how Black and Brown-owned businesses have also suffered recently. LaCrai Mitchell, thank you.
Thank you.